It's spooky month, and you know what's spooky? Talking about trans characters with the gaming community. So, a few weeks ago, Thousand Year Door HD got announced, and I very appropriately lost my mind. This game means the world to me, and has a super special place deep in my cold heart. I'm planning on making a video about why I feel the game is so special in the near future, but for right now, I want to talk about something more specific about the game. Or someone. Or some girl. Vivian, to be exact. The fourth partner in the game and the most OP partner in the game by a long shot. She's a fan favorite to say the very least. As a kid, Yoshi was always my favorite because, he made you run fast. But as I've gotten older, I've grown to really appreciate Vivian, not just for fiery jinx, but her story as well, and how wholesome and perfectly in tone it is for this weird and wacky game. Anyways, totally off topic, you may also know that Vivian's character isn't exactly the same in all regions of the game. I'm sure you've noticed, but online a lot of people refer to and see Vivian as transgender because of these other localizations. And they are correct. Vivian is very much trans, in basically every translation that isn't English. And even in the English translation, it is very easy to see the remnants of this story, and it's completely understandable that our story spoke to so many trans folk out here in the West. So we're going to talk about this, where it comes from, what it means, and why it's pretty much crystal clear that it was the original writer's intent. Now, I want to preface this a bit. I know I'm kind of treading hot water with this topic, but I'm going to be talking about this topic as objectively as possible. This isn't about what I think, and more about what the game is clearly saying. So before we have a quote-unquote completely reasonable disagreement about this, just try to sit through the whole video and understand where I'm coming from, okay? No? Well, I don't care. I'm the one with the content, you're the one consuming it. I think it's safe to say that the Japanese localization is the intended written story for these characters. Game was made in Japan, Vivian was created by Japanese writers. Makes sense, I think. So, I'll be mainly referring to the Japanese version of the game when talking about how she's written. Not that she's drastically different in terms of personality, but the story was pretty damn altered, which I'll get to in a little bit. That being said, I can't read Japanese, unfortunately. So while there are a few choice lines translated by people online, I don't think it was really enough context for me to fully understand the writer's intent, so I ended up reaching out to my friend Trips to help translate the remaining dialogue I couldn't find anywhere else. They're super skilled at reading and understanding Japanese. They gave me a bunch of notes and helped me fully understand the context of the vocabulary and grammar they're using in some of these lines, which was insanely helpful. It painted a way clearer picture of this character for me. Also, you should definitely check out their Twitch because they're a super fun VTuber. Please support my friend. Anyways, Vivian is this cute little purple ghost girl who hangs out with her shitty brothers, Margarine, or Beldam in English, and Marilyn, who are constantly bullying and mocking Vivian for how she acts, usually in response to her clumsiness and her feminine demeanor. Vivian ends up being pretty submissive towards her brothers and is in this constant fear of being punished. She's cute, but obviously just kind of seems like the token meek one of this pretty tropey trio of characters. Not much is screaming at you that she's going to be important later in the story. You even beat her up when you first meet her, oops. But a little later, these three show up again. So after Mario loses, oh wait. Yeah, there are people who are going to be playing this game for the first time pretty soon, huh? Well, slight spoilers for Chapter 4 in this game. I can't really just skip talking about the plot of this chapter, it'll most likely be brought up a lot in this video. It's hard for me to give you the full context on why Vivian's story works so well without spoiling a few little surprises in this chapter, so fair warning, I guess. So, after Mario loses his identity to Dupless, he runs into Vivian again, who is being berated by her asshole brothers for losing the actual real-ass grenade they wanted to use. ? She doesn't recognize Mario because he's like a purple silhouette thing, and also can't say his name because it was stolen. Very cute storybook-esque storytelling there. Vivian decides to team up with not Mario to get his identity back, explaining that she wasn't really sure if she wanted to stick around with her brothers anymore anyway. Gotta quickly say that this moment is genuinely one of the most sincere story moments in like any Mario game. Mario just recently lost all of his friends and his own damn identity to this Dupless guy, so running into Vivian and connecting with her, a girl who feels similarly alone, feels so natural. You get this really cute shot of them just talking for a few seconds, no actual dialogue bubbles, just a zoom out with them chatting. Both Vivian and Mario have reasons to trust each other in this moment. They have motivations beyond, I need to turn invisible for this next puzzle. They connect naturally. It's really sweet, and as a kid, seeing Vivian be your next partner was so cool to me. This character I thought was just another Team Rocket-ass antagonist for me to beat up every chapter or two. Turns out to be one of my main party members? That's pretty different and pretty cool. Anyways, so you bada bing, bada boom, get to Dupless, beat him up, Vivian decides to stick around, and that's kind of it for her story. The game has a very cartoony episodic feel, so her episode is kinda over and pretty rarely referenced again. But that's okay, because there's plenty here as is. The main takeaway with Vivian is that she's ostracized for the way she is. Her brothers mock her for being such a klutz, but more importantly for this discussion, they mock her for her feminine demeanor. One of the introduction lines to this trio is Vivian referring to the team as sisters accidentally, and Beldam getting on her ass for it, saying something akin to, "Aren't you a man?" and even using more male-associated terms to refer to her, like using the term omae in this scene. This is clearly written and supposed to be perceived as a way to mock Vivian. But despite this, Vivian still refers to herself as a girl many times, using feminine pronouns to refer to herself and being very feminine-coded. Having a very anime feminine coded stance with her hands, saying stuff like oof when she's giggling, giving Mario a little kiss in the cheek, something primarily the girl characters do in this game, kind of a lot. She's very obviously embracing her femininity and wants to be seen and referred to as a girl based on her dialogue. And this is very, very cool to see in a Nintendo game. Vivian does have some confidence issues, but her identity is never a part of that. She sees herself as a girl and makes it very clear that she does. Sure, she doesn't fight for her identity with her dialogue, but she shouldn't need to. It's her identity. The writing gets a little messy when it comes to her descriptions by other characters and the game's narration in general. The game almost always refers to her as a boy who acts like a girl, which is not a very pleasant way to describe a transgender girl. But honestly, Japan in 2004 probably wasn't too pleasant to transgender people as a whole, unfortunately. The concept of being trans may have been pretty foreign to a Japanese writer at the time. And while this isn't an excuse to be rude, I really don't feel the game is being rude to Vivian. The opposite, actually. I think they are embracing Vivian for who she is and are encouraging you to embrace her identity as well. Give you an example. When Goombella tattles Vivian, she says something along the lines of, "Vivian is the younger sister of the Siren Trio. I mean, youngest brother. Even then, he is pretty cute. It's possible even cuter than me. No way, what am I thinking?" The joke here is that Goombella is feeling insecure about Vivian being cuter than her, despite her seeing Vivian as a boy. Sure, it makes Goombella look a little transphobic, judging by the wording, but the joke isn't Vivian is trans, the joke is the way Goombella reacted to it. She is the joke. She is the punchline. Vivian is just existing, and it's making Goombella feel insecure. And while the game's writing is a little dated and maybe kind of in bad taste sometimes, it's not fighting against Vivian's identity, it's fighting for it. I think this is very much reflected in her storyline with Mario as well. Mario's story in Chapter 4 is literally about his true identity being stolen by a bad guy. It makes sense Vivian would relate and feel emotionally invested in Mario's situation. She's going through a similar thing with her brothers. Her brothers are constantly mocking her and trying to contest her true identity, her cute, feminine, and kinda ditzy identity. And Mario is immediately willing to trust Vivian, despite knowing that she works with some of the bad guys. That little conversation they had in that scene that I mentioned I liked feels so necessary to kind of establish that Mario and Vivian are making a connection and understanding each other in that moment. I don't think it's a coincidence they chose to write a scenario like this in the chapter you meet Vivian. It all makes too much sense. And if you think I'm overthinking this, literally Dupless and the other Siren brothers end up teaming up in the final chapter. This game is screaming at the player to make these connections, I swear. And this doesn't just make sense in the context of the chapter, but even the game as a whole. Thousand Year Door is undoubtedly a weird and different Mario game. Even comparing it to the first Paper Mario, it's surprisingly unique. The humor is wacky and stupid, the characters are weird and unconventional. Being different is its MO, it's its X factor. The developers know this. Stuff like this doesn't happen coincidentally. It's part of the game's design philosophy. It embraces its uniqueness. The developers, the writers, the artists, everyone involved loved being weird and unique. It's why it's the way it is. It's why it oozes so much charm and why it connects to so many people. Why people yearn for Mario games to be like this again. So how perfectly in character is someone like Vivian in this game? A character who dares to be different and is unapologetically herself. How could a game like Thousand Year Door not support her unique identity? It reflects the game too well. And again, I don't think this is just a coincidence. I have too much respect for these devs to just let it be a coincidence. Vivian was written to be a character that fits so well within the game's identity. And what other Mario games have something like this? It's so rich in personality and is so thematically dense. Just more reasons why I think this game is so well done. It's not just some blind nostalgia, I swear. This game is like really super fucking good. But now we get to the question, does this mean Vivian is literally transgender? Yes, but I'll explain. Like I said earlier, Vivian clearly sees herself as a girl and makes an attempt to always refer to herself as a girl. But it is true that the game doesn't blatantly say she's transgender. Like I mentioned earlier, it was Japan in 2004, even beyond the idea of transgender identities being way less accepting and the general populace being much more transphobic. It also wasn't as well understood in 2004, I feel. I don't think it's fair to say the game is transphobic when it's clearly saying we love Vivian for who she is and want you to as well. The situation reminds me a lot of another piece of Japanese media from a long time ago called Stop Hibari-kun, a manga series about a trans girl who is constantly being contested for who she is because it's not normal. And while there are a lot of jokes revolving around her gender identity, like Vivian, Hibari is never the butt of these jokes. The punchline is always the insecurity people have about her and how ridiculous they look for being like that. Hibari is depicted as beautiful, strong, and confident. The series has aged poorly in many, many ways, but the way Hibari was depicted was way ahead of its time. Despite the manga never saying she's transgender exactly, using older, way less progressive blanket terms like calling her a crossdresser and such, it is clearly about a trans girl trying to identify as a girl. The premise literally stemmed from a mangaka who has gone on record saying he wished he was born as a girl. And even if the series at its core is basically like the weird and wacky antics of a gender non-conforming person, it's doing a lot to make trans girls look beautiful. Not just like pretty anime girl beautiful, but like beautiful for being confident in who they are and the strength that comes from that. And I think Vivian's story is written in a similar way. Her identity is supposed to be seen as a little unique and different, but that's okay. Honestly, better than okay. It's what makes us love her and empathize with her. Again, Thousand Year Door is all about that. To love and embrace what makes us unique and see it as a strength, not a weakness. So even despite Japan not being too keen on using a term as literal as transgender, it's very clear that she is trans, and her story is about her being trans. I think there's a common talking point that because the game itself refers to Vivian as a boy, that she's not transgender. Vivian defines herself. Her story defines herself just like we define ourselves, and our stories define ourselves. If the narration says one thing but the story is saying another, we listen to the story because it's the one we are experiencing. Ever played like the Stanley Parable? Come on, man. Vivian's story is all about her being herself and loving who she is and finding new family that accepts her and loves her. Besides Goombella. And that is like the most trans story that could ever trans this trans earth. Oh yeah, and then the English localization basically removed all of that in favor of making her cisgendered and changing her brothers to be sisters, removing basically any trans allegories in the process. Or did they? Well, kinda, but not entirely. I think this decision was weak from Nintendo, but I kinda get it. They were probably worried about the controversy that would plague this game's reputation if they kept a clearly trans character in the game, which is another point towards the she's obviously trans case, by the way. I think the decision to make her a cisgendered girl was the better choice than removing her feminine personality entirely and making her a cisgendered boy. That would feel ridiculously in bad taste. But despite the change, her story is still fundamentally similar. She still has her shitty siblings who don't accept her, and she still has Mario who gives her the support she needs to stick up for herself and love the things that make her unique. So it makes too much sense that so many trans people still related to her story over here. As someone who is not exactly cisgendered, I'd say Vivian's story always spoke to me. As a kid, I was mocked and discouraged from engaging in more feminine-coded things. I talk a bit about it in my Trixie Tang video, but stories like Vivian's are what kept me who I was, kept me believing that it was okay that I'm unique, and that I should embrace those unique traits because they're what makes me, me. I hope I was able to articulate why I feel this character is who she clearly is, why I'm confident a game that so many people have such a strong connection to was able to deliberately write a story to connect with transgender people, to help them feel seen, loved, and confident in who they are. Vivian sure is cool, huh? Do you love Vivian? Gush about how much you love Vivian in the comments, or tell me how wrong you think I am in the rudest way possible. It's only engagement on my video and spreading the good word of Vivian's trans identity to everyone out there, so go for it. Anyways, see you later, friends.
I hate the alarm clock I chose.